welcome everybody. So instead of the usual habit of introducing the speaker and also the subject, what we thought today was that the speaker would start the session with a small introduction himself, and then we would give more of a context that why potato eaters had taken this subject and why we should why are we actually interested in this. Utkarsh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Good evening, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session called Ramayana's, the many versions. Before I begin, just one small note, call it a disclaimer if you want to, is that I'm discussing a literary work. I'm discussing an epic. I'm discussing what is also known as a kavya, written by the author sage Valmiki. I'm not talking of Bhagwan Ram or Lord Vishnu or anything of that sort. I'm discussing threadbare, a literary work called an epic, which is known as Ramayana, and we will leave it exactly that way. So welcome to the session of many Ramayans and many versions of it. Quite often we get a question, why are there so many versions? Okay, and the answer is often in the epic itself. And that's the beauty of this brilliant epic, which has this kind of an answer within the epic. And let me tell you an interesting story here. That after many years, when everything was kind of over, life was settled, Ram was one day sitting in his palace, contemplating, when suddenly an announcement was made that Lord Brahma and sage Vasisht wanted to visit him, and they were at the doorstep. So immediately Ram gets up, welcomes them, and the two of them said, look, Ram, we need to speak to you about something very, very important. However, this is a very, very secret discussion, and we don't want anybody else to listen to it. So please put a trusted guard at the doorstep and make sure that nobody comes in. Ram was about to call Hanuman, who's the most trusted lieutenant of Ram, when he suddenly remembered that something else had happened a few minutes back. Ram was toying with his ring, and suddenly the ring fell off, and the ring fell on the ground, and suddenly the ring went right in. And Ram was quite surprised that how could that happen? Now, the only person who could take a different shape was Hanuman. So he had called Hanuman and said, will you just follow this hole which is formed on my ground, and just go and get my ring. So Hanuman took a small shape of a very, very small bee, and he went inside. So that's when and he had gone there to look for Ram's ring. And that's when Ram realized that he needed to put somebody else. And then he calls Lakshman. And he calls Lakshman and says that no matter what happens, nobody should be allowed inside. And if that happens, then that person, whoever comes in, will be beheaded. It was so important. The doors were closed. Lakshman was sitting outside, guarding, ensuring that nobody goes. But as luck would have it, Rishi Vishwamitra walks in at that very moment, after some time rather, and demanded an immediate audience with Ram. And Lakshman said, you can't go in because he's already busy in a meeting. And Vishwamitra gets very, very angry that how can anybody stop Rishi Vishwamitra? So he gets angry and he says, look, you don't have a choice. If you don't do it, I will burn the entire Ayodhya in my anger. And that's when Lakshman weighs the pros and cons. He says, burning entire Ayodhya versus him getting beheaded. And he decides after contemplation, and he opens the door. Fortunately, the discussion inside had just got over. Lord Brahma and Rishi Vasisht had come to tell Ram that his job, his purpose, his reason of coming on earth was now over, and he should take a decision on going back to Vaikunth as Lord Vishnu's abode. So he had to go back, and that's what the discussion was all about. Lakshman, who had walked in, of course, had made a mistake because he was not asked to come in. So immediately, Lakshman also suggests that he better be beheaded. Otherwise, Ram would be accused once again of not living up to his words. So what to do? But remember the fact that in many of the versions, Lakshman was also an avatar of the Sheshnag, on which Ram or Vishnu is supposed to be lying. So that's the story of Ram and Lakshman. But we haven't forgotten Hanuman, right? Because Hanuman went inside that hole. Hanuman took a small shape of a bee. He goes deep inside, and he lands in a huge place with a huge bowl full of rings. And he sees God of the underground, and the God asks him, "What are you here for?" So Hanuman says, "I've come to look for my Lord's ring." He says, "Whose ring?" He says, "Lord Ram's ring." So the Lord of Underworld says, "Okay, there's a bowl of rings out there. Take your Ram's ring and you can leave." So that's when Hanuman asks, "What do you mean, your Ram?" So that is when the God of Underground tells him that every yug will have a Ram and every Ram will have his own Ramayana. So you decide which one is your Ram's ring and you can go. And that is the story that within the Ramayana we have, that Ramayana has many, many versions. Why do they have many versions? We will see that as we go ahead. And this is the beginning of why Ramayana has so many versions. Yes,
So,
Nachi.
yeah. So it was, so when I was like discussing with Utkarsh also, like the idea was like we all love stories. There's no doubt that stories are wonderful, and like as children, as adults, we all love stories. And also I feel that there is a need for storytelling, and like even mythologies in any civilization, and we keep developing our own mythology as we progress. And like there are modern myths, and like there are other things which are like very getting prominence, especially in today's time. This idea of Ramayana, especially when we are in a juncture of history of in India, where so much had happened in last 20 years, so much had happened in last 20 years in name of Ram. So I thought like, yeah, like there is so much of polarization, communal politics, everything had happened, and the right wing had tried to appropriate everything and anything which had happened in name of Ram. And like we know what happened in Babri in 96, and post that, India's the nature, the secular nature of India had come into question, and still it's in the question. And we saw the injustice, what had happened, and like we saw all that which had happened. So we thought like it's very important also to know that within the paradigm of Ramayana itself, we do have a certain kind of uh, cultural diversity. And like we'll be also talking about something called Mapillaramayana, which is essentially the Ramayana which is being told by Muslims. So this is very in a way it's a beautiful story, no doubt about it. But post Ramanand Sagar's version of Ramayana telecasted in Doordarshan, I think Sita, Hanuman, or Ravan, other things about the Ramayana, everything was like even forgotten. It's just the one dimensional misogynist idea of Ram which has been propagated, and through that all kind of polarization had happened. And we are now in a situation where there's so much of animosity, so much of hatred against each other. So I would like to ask you, sir, like how like beyond this, how do we actually go back to those times when this can be still enjoyed as a story? And sorry, like before I uh, get into this question, like we didn't give a formal introduction to Mr. Utkarsh Patel. He's a very well-known mythologist, and like that's what I was also asking. Like, what does a mythologist mean? We'll come back to that question later. Maybe what I asked about post whatever had happened post Babri and post Ramanand Sagar's telecast. How do we actually go back to those times when they were like small uh, small tribal groups telling Ramayana, and like why is Ramayana so important to India? If that is so, maybe I'll simplify the question. Yeah, sir.
You know what you have to see, sorry, are you done or?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Yeah. See, one has to understand that Ramayana has survived centuries, because of its fluidity, because of the fact that it's such a brilliant text. And the brilliance of a text is seen in its adaptation. How easily can a story be adapted? How easily can a story be imbibed as yours? And I think that is the significance of any epic, or especially in the case of Ramayana. And you know, Romila Thapar has made a statement, and let me quote here: the Ramayana does not belong to any one moment in history. It does not belong to any one moment in history, for it has its own history, which lies embedded in the many versions which are woven around the theme at different times and different places. You see, you have to see Ramayana as a text which has been accepted. Even people who've criticized certain characters have accepted it as their own text. And that is the significance of it. I can keep debating, I can keep criticizing, I can keep finding faults with a particular character. But the fact that I'm not throwing it away is the fact that this is my story. This is our story. And you know, there's a very beautiful thing that somebody had once said, that Ramayana is like a flowing river. You know, it flows through different terrains, and wherever it flows, from whichever terrain it is, people treat it as their own. And just as Ramayana speaks to people, people speak to Ramayana. That's the beauty of Ramayana. And I can keep criticizing. There are certain sections which criticize certain aspects, but they have still found it necessary to adapt it to their liking. And I think that is the most important thing. It is not anybody's property. It is our story. It's our heritage. It's our, foundational epic, which kind of gives us numerous shades of learnings, some good, some not so good. It also tells the tale of the times. It tells you the tales of the time, which you can't avoid. And if you make it static, fortunately, this was never ever made static. You know, the day you make something static is the day you kill that stuff. The moment you allow it to be molded, you know, to be changed, to alter, make amendments, it survives. And the very fact that we have so many versions, and people across the world have translated it. Why? Why have they translated across the world? I mean, look at this gentleman called Father Kamil Bulke, you know, a Jesuit missionary who had come to India with a very clear task, was so moved by it that he actually went and learned Sanskrit. He did his master's in Sanskrit. Then he went and learned his Hindi. He did his MA in Hindi. And then he even did a research, which today is a huge body of work, which is known as Ramkatha, Utpatti or Vikas, written by a Jesuit priest in Hindi, right? That's the beauty of the epic. Look at the way the epic has gone across Southeast Asian countries, Thailand, Burma, every other nation out there. You know, they have their own version of Ramayana, to the extent that I was told by somebody that till a few decades back, Thailand used to think that Ramayana was their story. That's the ability of the story, to find a place at every place. And that's the beauty of it. And the fact that we have allowed it over centuries to adapt, to change, to make modifications, to criticize, to debate, is the richness of the text. And that is why I think it's very, very important that we allow it to continue that way. And today also, right till the 70s, people were rewriting their versions of Ramayana. In Andhra Pradesh, the Telugu author Ranganayakamba wrote an entire treatise on her version of Ramayana, which was slightly different. Her interpretation was very different. Nonetheless, she wrote it, and though she was criticized, but so be it. It's still a body of work.
So, so when we talk about different versions, like obviously we'll go to your slides, which are actually going to talk about it in very much detail. Uh, can we just talk a little about what is myth and how is it different from a story? Because as again I have to sorry to go back to the like the ugly part of this, but because it is claimed as a story which had happened, which almost like treated as a historical event, all these things about whether the temple was there, when was the temple there, and all that happened, and like, and you know what had happened, and people know what had happened there, and still we are suffering because of that polarization. So can you just throw some light on how is it different from a story, and how, what is the historicity of such kind of a thing, because often it's misinterpreted and propagated in that way.
First and foremost, let me define myth in a very simple form. I don't want to end up taking a lecture here, but nonetheless, let's explain what a myth is. A sacred story. And when I use the word sacred, I am not using it in terms of religious sacredness. Sacred in the sense that they believed in the fact that this story is true, right? And then it has been handed over generations after generations, and that's what we call is a myth. Myth, not as in popular English meaning, that's, myth is equal to, it's not equal to mithya. It's something that's very, very important for people who believed in them and for whom the story was initially told. The story was not told for you and me. Let's be very clear. None of the myths, none of the epics were told for you and me. It was told for a particular milieu, a particular social, setup. That's a myth. An epic is a different form. Epic is different. An epic is a huge, long poem, poetical story, if I can use the word, wherein there is an interplay between gods and human beings. It's a saga, right? Where you have gods and human beings interplaying, where gods are trying to direct something, humans are expected to do something, and that's an epic. Ramayana is an epic. Myths are stories which tell you about a tradition. It's answering a question. Myths are answering certain questions. They can be questions related to cosmology. Where did the world come from? Where did I come from? Where did the mountains come from? So on and so forth. Who am I? Etc. That's your cosmological. It could also be sometimes some element of it is setting up social norms and social structure. Who should talk first? How to behave in a group, in a one-to-one, etc. Who's more superior? Who's less superior? Social norms. Right? So marriage as an institution, family as an institution, these things are also established through myths. Then it also tries and answers many of our primary questions. What, who, why, how, where do I go after death? What happens to me? If I don't behave well, what happens? If I behave well, my afterlife, etc., etc. That's your myth. Epic takes care of a story and it tells you in a poetic form about a particular story, about a generation, about a person. Name it. Ramayana, Mahabharata, they all fall in the genre of an epic. Is there an element of historicity in an epic? Well, every author who writes something adds in an element of what he might have seen. Let's take the writer story about lockdown, right? We are all suffering from lockdown. We are all suffering from a pandemic. I use this element and write it down, but I build an entire monster called COVID. My monster is called COVID, right? If somebody reads the story after 100 odd years, okay, if he believes that there was a monster in 2020 called COVID, then it's his problem, right? Not the author's problem. Because the author was writing a story wherein he took the nuances, he took the qualities, he took the effects of a COVID kind of a thing, and he called it a monster, right? This does not mean after 200 years that this monster was in existence. So I write a story, but I do borrow from reality. Now, Valmiki, when he wrote the story, did he borrow anything from reality? Was there a germ of the story that was in existence? Well, a lot of scholars believe that this was probably some kind of a folk tale which was in existence, which could have been be around and built it into a beautiful narrative, which has the nuances of an epic. But so to that extent, I would say there is some amount of historicity. He might have witnessed something, he might have visualized something, he might have added something. So to say that everything that you see in the epic, his history, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So I think we can start with the slides. So I'll come back later
Right.
with whatever
Sure.
I have to ask.
I mean, anybody has a question, you can reserve it till the end, but feel free. Whatever I know, I will answer. Whatever I know will get me into trouble, I will skirt. Let me be as honest as that. And whatever I don't know, I'll tell you honestly, I don't know, I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Because times are bad. Right, Nachi? Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on. And right. So let me explain, before we get into the different versions as to why are there so many versions. So I told you about the fact that there are many Rams and there are many stories. This is not the only story about, many Rams. There is an interesting story that there was a 14th century Kannada poet by the name of Vyas who wrote a Mahabharata. And when somebody asked him that, why did you write a Kannada Mahabharata which upholds the earth, was groaning under the burden of numerous Ramayans, and I want to trouble the cosmic serpent with so many, one more burden. So there are many, many stories that we have as to why. And as I said, they're all part of the basic texts which talks about it. And there's one more very interesting, and I'll just take a minute there, where Sita, when she learns that Ram is going for an exile, then Sita requests that, no, I'm going to come with you. And Ram is trying to explain to Sita, saying, no, you can't come. The terrain is not good. It's not a comfortable place. This goes on, so first Sita requests, then Sita cajoles and Sita cries. This goes on. Ultimately, Sita loses it. And Sita says, and that's an interesting observation. She says that, name one Ramayana where Sita does not go with Ram. So you see, once again, it hints at the fact that there are so many versions. How can I not go? So within the texts, there are interesting versions of why there are so many Ramayans here. But let's understand first, as to why, and as I said, there are nearly, Father Kamil Bulke himself in one of his books has written, that there are more than 300 versions of it. There's a very interesting article, an essay written by A.K. Ramanujan, and you can get it on the net, which says something around 300 Ramayans. And he talks of 5 of them, which he kind of discusses threadbare. So you have Valmiki, Tulsidas, who wrote it in the local language, Kamban, who wrote it in Tamil, and Kritibhash, so on and so forth. We also have a Jain and Buddhist, of which we'll touch upon a few of them. So I'm not going to touch any of these, which are well known. So everybody knows the Kamban Rama and the Kritibhash, though I might touch upon Kritibhash a little bit, and the Tulsidas' Ramayana. These are very, very popular. I'll try and touch ones which are not necessarily all that popular. But before that, once again, let us understand what is the concept of retelling. And that's what I wanted to touch upon. And I'm taking the reference of the Bengali Ramayana, which was written by Kritibhash. And why did he find it necessary to write it? Because there have been so many versions. And, you must understand one thing is that every generation, okay, is influenced by what is his or her surrounding. So these kind of stories, which were written ages back, kind of lose its touch, kind of lose its essence in terms of relatability, right? So the contemporariness is to bring in the charm of believability. And I think what Kritibhash has done, is to sort of bring it very close to his people. And that's what he does. For example, one of the most important things he's done is he's reduced the size of it. He's reduced the size of it, because in Valmiki Ramayana there's extensive descriptions of the forest, of the palaces, of the life of Ram and his brothers in the palace. He's brought all that down. He's reduced it drastically in size. He wanted his version to be appreciated by his people, which is in the East, right? So while the Valmiki version, for example, describes richly the natural scenery and all, he has removed it completely. He has ensured that his story falls in with all the flora and fauna of the Gangetic Plain, because that's where his story was going to be. So instead of talking about long and tall pine trees and cedar trees, he's not talking about them. He's completely eliminated them. And he's speaking about jasmine flowers and ketaki flowers, which are something that the local people tend to understand and relate to. And there are many other changes. For example, the cottage he built in the low plains was suitable for rural people to stay in it, right? He felt that his people in the rural milieu of Bengal would not understand or comprehend a room with heavy Gothic decorations and in the pillars and the tall ceilings. He removed all that. He also changed the character of Kaushalya, who was a lofty Kshatrani of the north, to a very doting, dear, soulful mother who cries at her sons leaving the palace, unlike Kaushalya, who's stoic and sort of shows a tough exterior. So all that is what, and that's when the story becomes more yours. For example, in the Ram and Sita's marriage, the entire marriage takes place as per the Bengali rituals. So every ritual that a Bengali marriage celebrates have been incorporated into it. So why does somebody need to do it? Because then the story is theirs. Then the story is something that they feel is ours, and not a story which is for a very different. And remember, we are talking about a time, this was, I think, around the 16th or probably the 14th century when this prose was written by Kritibas. Times were different. Globalization was not so common. People didn't really know that, okay, if Kamban wrote it in Tamil Nadu, it's an Indian story. No, it was distant. So to make the story yours, it is important. And that's why Kamban wrote it in Tamil, Kritibas wrote it in Bengali, Tulsidas wrote it in Hindi or the Avadi, to make the story more acceptable. And a very beautiful, interesting analogy I would like to give is that if somebody melts, a gold coin of, let's say, the Kanishka or the Ashoka regime, and stamps it with the local village king's stamp. By doing this, certainly it gives it a local currency, though the locality where it has it been made may not be as large as the Ashokan or the Kanishka's empire, but it still belongs there. And that's the kind of analogy which talks about it. And all the nuances, local idioms, local retellings, local understanding, the local food, the local flora and fauna gets into this kind of a retelling, which makes the story more yours. And that is why we have so many versions of tellings and retellings in our in Ramayana to begin with. An interesting example I would like to give is how they change the text. For example, in Chhattisgarh, there are these tribal people, they are the marginalized section of the society called the ramanamis. Now, how did this happen? It is believed that there was a person by the name of Parshuram, that was one of their person, who had long back developed leprosy. It's called leprosy today. In those days, they didn't know. They just thought this was some kind of a wrath of the gods. And before his family could be ostracized, he decided to leave at night. And while he was leaving, a sadhu came and told him that don't leave. You're a devotee, just go home and chant the name of Ram. Ram ka naam lo is what he was told. He went back home because he felt something different when the man told him whatever he told him. He goes back, and in the morning when he wakes up, he's cured of leprosy. And it is believed that from that day onwards, people literally, as you can see these images, these are modern images of people of the Ramananami sect, that they started chanting Ram Nam, and they had their houses plastered with Ram Nam, and they've even tattooed their bodies completely with Ram. But when they started chanting Ram Nam, they started chanting the Manas or the Ramcharidamanas written by Tulsidas. And that's what they started chanting. And this went on for some time till certain people from their community started getting educated and they started reading it. Earlier, they were chanting it more out of hearing and memory. They started chanting this more now because some of them started reading it. And when they started reading it, they realized that there were certain things which were going against them, against their existence. For example, and I'll take just one brief example, that one of the you know, verses went something like this. It said that Vipradhenu Surasanta Hita Inha Manoj Avatara, which means that this is means Lord Ram incarnated for the sake of Brahmins, cows, devtas, and sages. There is no mention of the marginalized set of people, which was them. So what could they do in that case? So what they did was that they realized that there is no mention of them. So they made a minor change in that and they changed the verse in exactly this format as you see, Ram Dena Surasanta Hita Inha Manoj Avatar, which means that Lord Ram incarnated to teach, give the word of Ram to devtas and sages, or provide what is known as the Ram Nam. Now, as time passed and as they went more and more educated, they started understanding more and more about the text is when they continuously kept on changing. So they would just strike out what they felt was irrelevant, add in a new word or a new text there. And this went on and on and on. And around the same time, while this was happening, these people were also influenced by Kabir and Kabir's teachings. So and Kabir was a very, very secular poet, as you all know, and he spoke about a lot of equality and all that. And a number of his dohas also started going as a part of the Ramnami's Ramayana. So what they have ultimately today is a completely rewritten text. The nuances haven't changed. Ram still is the god there and every other story. But some of these, elements where they felt that they didn't belong have been added. And that's how a new text called the Ramananami Ramayana has got created. So you see, this is how texts change or they need to change, right? As and when people understand. So we've seen a case, where we say that a retelling has to kind of be your text, and that's why many of the versions have been written and rewritten. And here in Ramnami, we see how and why they needed to change because it was contradicting their own belief system. It was contradicting their own personalities and their belief system. And that's how the Ramnami, but it's still the Ramayana. See, that's the interesting part of it. Let's look at one example here. And the women's Ramayana. This is one of the most under discussed and under published work of Ramayana, and that's women's Ramayana. What is women's Ramayana? Generally, if you read an epic, there is hardly a role for women in our epics. They're either crying by the side or they're shadows of their husbands. And the story is told from the male perspective. It's about men. It's about wars. It's about pride. It's about, as we say, ijat. It's about name, right? It's about territories. It's about battles. That's not what a woman in those days was concerned about. She didn't care much about battles. She didn't care much about wars. So what did she care about? Let us see. Interestingly, we have a Bengali Ramayana by the name of Chandrabati, who was born in the undivided Bengal at a point of time. And I don't know if I have yes, the place that you can see is Moimonshing. And Moimonshing is a place where Chandrabati was born. And Chandrabati did not quite have a very happy youth, if I can say so. She was ditched by the person who she was going to get married to just the day prior to the wedding. So she decided she would never get married. And she had decided she would remain a celibate all her life and spend her time in worshipping. But Chandravati had already written a number of religious songs which were in existence. But post this, she started writing what is known as the Bengali Ramayana by the woman. Interestingly, Chandravati was highly critical about Ram, and her story starts with the birth of Sita, not the birth of Ram. All other Ramayans generally start with Ram as a center, not this. So everything that she has written is written from the perspective of Sita. So it is more like Sita's story. And what does she talk about? She talks about Sita's concerns. She talks about Sita's pathos. She talks about how Sita feels slighted, at different stages, how Sita feels lonely. And the entire war, she's just written in about 2 pages. Because according to her, what Sita did not witness was probably not of importance. That's Chandravati's Ramayana. And, interestingly, Chandravati's Ramayana was highly criticized. It was supposedly torn in public and not read because quite obviously the Brahmins could not accept this retelling of Ramayana. However, lately, this book has been resurrected, by, I'm forgetting the name. Okay, I'll try and get the name by the end of the session. It's been resurrected by her, and she has translated it painstakingly with all the nuances of the erstwhile period and come out with an English translation called Chandravati's Ramayana. Interesting take on it, and a very, very different take on it. The story completely takes Sita's perspective, it's Sita's view, and at places, Chandravati is highly critical about Ram and some of the decisions taken by Ram. But this is not the only woman's Ramayana. We have numerous regional songs in our country, especially in the, in Telugu. Often also some Bhojpuri songs and songs in Maithili, even songs in Maharashtra, which talk about aspects. Now, these songs are really not a sequential story of Ramayana, but they take up aspects which focus on a woman's life. For example, Sita as the child bride. Now, there's an interesting song which goes like this, that, the Bharat has come, they are waiting outside, Ram and Dashrath, everybody's come, the Bharat is waiting. The Panditji, as usual, is saying, Muhurat bita ja raha hai, where is the child? Now, Sita is a child at that point of time and says, where is the child? But for some reason, Janak is, kind of being very dilly-dally, and he says, I'm bringing, but he's just not bringing. So then Dashrath realizes that something is amiss, and he walks up to Janak and says, is there a problem? So he says, yes, there is a problem, please come. And he takes, Janak takes Dashrath and takes him, through the palace and takes him to a huge room. In the middle of a big room, there's a big bed. And in that bed is a big child, Sita, sleeping. Now, Sita had fallen asleep just before her marriage. And Janak, as her father, is worried that I don't want to disturb my child sleeping. Who knows, once she goes to Sasural, she might not get a peaceful sleep. See the concern of a father for a child. And mind you, this is a social structure. It's got nothing to do with being a king or a king's daughter. It's a thought process that a lot of parents have when their child is going, to another place. And Janak tells Dashrath and says that, look, that's my daughter. I have brought her up like a flower. She's very, very delicate, Please take good care of her and make sure that no trouble comes close to her. A lot of scholars have felt that in earlier days, there was this whole thing about marital rape, wherein girls were insecure from the male members of their own in-laws. And every parent was always worried that their daughter doesn't have to go through this, because if it does, there is no complaining about it. It could just be a hint that, my daughter is different. She's very delicate. Just take care of it. Also, there are these giving away of the Sita song. Giving away is, when the daughter is being, sent to her in-laws, there are these songs. And there's a very interesting, there are numerous, I'm just telling you one or two of them. One song wherein, Sita's mother calls Ram's mother and says, look, my daughter is a very obedient girl. But, there are certain things I have never had a chance to teach her because I thought that she was too young. She doesn't know how to boil milk, and she doesn't know how to drain our water from boiled rice. Teach her. Don't be upset with her if she messes up a couple of times. So you see, once again, it's the mother's concern that I have not taught her how to household chores because I thought ki mere yahan kitne din rahegi, but you take good care and please teach her. These songs have got nothing to do with the Ramayana story. These songs have more to do with how people reacted, and they use these characters to sort of vent their concerns about couples. Let me tell you another interesting story about pregnancy craving. And there's an interesting song in the Telugu version wherein Sita is pregnant, and everybody's sitting around her and everybody's kind of teasing her, saying, what do you want to eat? What do you feel like eating? And Sita keeps on, saying, oh, no, what I want to eat, I don't think anybody can get for me. This, I really want to eat something. That's when Lakshman jumps from somewhere and says, I'll get whatever you want. Tell me. So Sita, laughs and says, you sure you will be able to get it? He says, anything for you, Bhabhi. Just tell me what you want. And Sita says, okay, across 7 seas away from here, across 7 seas, there's a small island at a particular place. In the middle of the island is a coconut tree. And in that coconut tree is a honeycomb. I want to have honey from there. So everyone's staring at it, honey for what? And then I want to have my sada dosa with that honey. Now, interestingly, one is talking about a sada dosa here and a honey, outlandish kind of a requirement. And Lakshman immediately jumps and leaves. And he says, I'll get it for you. Story doesn't end here. The classic mother-in-law and daughter-in-law banter comes in. Kaushalya hears this, and Kaushalya says, oh my God, these girls of modern age, we've also gone through pregnancies. We've also had our pregnancy cravings, but we manage it with tamarind and something here and there. We never made such outlandish demands from anybody. While this song is often laughed at, while this song is often made, said in a very, in a jovial manner, interestingly, again, it's talking about a female concern. It is not talking of anything which is very macho, very manly. It's not talking about battles. It's not talking about the principles. It's not talking about Raghuvanshi cool. No, it's talking about what matters to females, what matters to women and their concerns. This goes on, and there are nearly 24 plus songs which have been resurrected in Telugu, many marriage songs which are played today, even in Bihar and Maharashtra. And there's one interesting story which comes about Sita's exile, that in one of the songs, that when Sita's been into exile, Urmila, the lesser known person that is Lakshman's wife, from literally stages a morcha. She takes all the girls of the family, and they all go to Rama and say that if you're sending Sita away, because you feel that she hasn't been chaste. And let me tell you, we've all not been very chaste when our husbands were not there. You need to send us away along with her. See the rebel, unheard of in any Ramayana. But this is a song of the erstwhile period wherein the girls, the women folk of Ayodhya, they rebel. They sing that you can't do it. So these are songs, which are all telling a very different song. And as I said, one can go on this. There are about so many songs. There are marriage songs, and there are separation songs. There are songs about how men can't be trusted, no matter what you do for them, they will always find faults, so on and so forth. And this takes me to a very interesting version of Ramayana called the Wayanandramayana. Now, the Wayanandramayana is, another set of tribal Ramayana from Kerala, and in the small district Wayanad, which kind of borders, both Karnataka and, Tamil Nadu. So, very interesting set of stories we have of the Wayanandramayana, and it's interestingly, is that there are close to 100 odd versions just in Wayanad. Now, what is important for us to understand is that these stories do not exist in a linear form the way Ramayana is. These exist as small stories. Each story takes Ram and these characters and are woven in the local milieu. That's the beauty of these stories. So you don't expect, certain characters might not even be there. Certain characters might be very, very different in their approach, and certain episodes might not even be there. That's not important because the story is trying to say a very different kind of a story. Okay, let's understand why not. And there are, I'm only going to narrate stories of only two tribes, that is known as the Adiyas and the Chettis. And they have their own set of stories. And, you know, as I said, they're not linear. An interesting story says that Sita's on her way somewhere, you know, when she's on her way somewhere. The story, that's exactly how the story will straight away start, that she's on her way somewhere and she meets Ravan. And Ravan, who's coming from opposite direction, and Ravan asks, where are you going and who are you? She said, I'm homeless. I don't have a house. I've just been evicted from my land. Now, this statement, I've been evicted from my land, is something that is very, very typical of tribals. As soon as development happens, the first thing that happens is the tribals are evicted from their land. They are literally in lack of land. They just move around. That's what the life of tribals is. And probably this is where the starting point of the story is, that they've been evicted from their land. And that's what Sita says. And Ravan says, okay, fair enough. If you have no place to stay, why don't you come over to my house and I'll give you a place to stay. So Ravan takes Sita to, and Sita agrees, and Ravan takes Sita, and Ravan takes Sita to his 12-storied house, 12-story house. In the meanwhile, Ravan has fallen in love with Sita and proposes marriage to Sita. Sita accepts it. Sita accepts it, but says that, look, for certain reason, I won't be able to marry for 12 years. And I would urge you to wait for 12 years for me if you want to get married to me. Till then, you can't see me often and you can't touch me. Ravan agrees to the condition and makes sure that she is given the topmost floor, that the 12th story of his big house, and given all the comforts of servants and whatever she needs. And that's where she's spending time. The story moves on. In between, we have, the story goes that Ram has also seen Sita somewhere at that point of time. He's also fallen in love. He gets Hanuman to somehow find Sita from wherever and get her. Hanuman finds Sita, convinces Sita that Ravan is not a nice guy and you should get married to this great person called Ram. First, as I said, I'm compressing the story. Sita kind of gets convinced. Sita comes, starts staying with Ram, gets married, and they start staying with Ram. But as it happens in every marriage, soon after, the marriage was on rocks. Why? Somehow, Ram was never happy with whatever Sita cooked for him. He would find pebbles in rice, he would find sand grains in rice, so on and so forth. And Sita was getting irritated when she suddenly realized that the whole day she's only working. You know, from morning to evening, she's working. She's preparing meals, she's washing the dishes, the utensils. She was getting frustrated because at Ravan's house, she never had to do anything. She had servants at her beck and call. So she was also reaching a stage of frustration. And in due course of time, while the marriage was really not going very well, Sita gets pregnant. When Sita gets pregnant, Ram overhears a conversation in the bazaar when he goes to the market that, well, somebody had seen her go with Ravan, so they were questioning Sita's chastity. A time had come when Ram was so irritated one day with Sita because Sita did not prepare the coffee very well. See, we have a coffee coming in here because this is Kerala. So Sita had not prepared coffee very well, and Ram complains about Sita's coffee, and Sita's shocked and says that you're complaining about coffee. And the other day you were complaining about rice, the other day 3 days. So there's a big fight, and Ram leaves. When Ram leaves, and there are some people who actually see Ram leaving, is when the matter spreads that, these two have separated. And when Sita learns about it, she's so upset that she decides to just leave one day. See how the story is talking about Sita simply leaving. And the aspects that we are talking about here is not happy with the food that is cooked. Sita not happy with having to do so much of work because every day Ram and Lakshman would leave home. She would be all alone the whole day. They would come back with a big animal and her job was to prepare, cook, shred. And she said, I have no end of the work. The story moves on, and Sita is, sort of upset about the fact Ram and Lakshman, they go in search of Sita, though at one point of time, Ram is not very keen to look for Sita, saying good riddance kind of a thing. And then while they were looking around at some point in time, they are caught by the tribals. They are caught by the tribals, and some of the tribal chiefs, they actually tie them to a tree and say that, why did you leave the daughter of our tribe? Why did you leave her like this way? And they kind of question. Interesting here is that they questioned Ram. We've never had an epic, or we've hardly had any versions which questions Ram as to why did you leave her when she was pregnant. And here is this tribal version which questions Ram that why did you leave your wife? Who's your responsibility? That why you left her when she needed you the most. Anyway, the matters are resolved. Sita comes in, and Ram says, join me and I'll take you back. And you know what Sita asks? Sita asks a question: what guarantee is there that you will not throw me out again by what you hear in public? Look at the audacity and the brilliance of this particular text, where Sita is questioning Ram. What guarantee is there that you will not throw me out again? That's the beauty of this whole epic, that we have allowed our characters to question. The tribal version is allowing to question, and we all have this great feeling that our epics, written in the most beautiful language, in Sanskrit or in the best of the languages, is an evolved set of people. When I go through the versions, and there are many of these tribal versions, I find the tribal versions more modern. I find them more contemporary. I find them more relevant in terms of doing justice to this particular text. And here we have a Sita, a tribal Sita, who's actually questioning Ram, saying, is there a guarantee that you will not throw me out just to please the public? Aggressive posturing done by Sita is unseen anywhere else. Let's look at another version here. So these are the images that you see are actually the temples, where which we have in Wayanad, which wherein they believe there are different stories, as I said, that after questioning, Sita just requests Mother Earth to part, and she will go and stay there, and she'll not come back to Ram. So these are the temples that you still find in Wayanad, and there are lots of them. Not only the temples, you even have the Sita Kund and those kind of things. A lot of places which have their own relevance here. Like this is where Sita is supposed to have cried a pond full of tears when she was abandoned. There are many stories, as I said, and these places are still thronged by people. These places, even when today people go to Wayanad, and the locals have a lot of belief here. This is not to say that Ram is not worshipped. Ram is also worshipped here, but it exists. This pond exists. The Sita temple exists. All this exists along with the veneration that even Ram receives here. I think that's what makes the text so rich in its ethos, that this is about not just about a story. This is something more to it. Let's look at a bhilramyana. I'm trying to take lesser known versions of Ramayana because everybody knows about the well-known ones. The lesser known, the bhilramyana also is a very interesting take on the Ramayana, because once again, the erstwhile Bhils were a matriarchal society, right? So of course, no more, not today anymore. They were a matriarchal society. And there, once again, we find the character of Sita to be extremely smart. Now, remember, in majority of the versions we've seen, Sita doesn't quite have a role to play. She's just a shadow of Ram, shedding copious tears, somewhere, earlier just following Ram, then getting kidnapped, and then having to go through Agni Pariksha, etc., etc. Not Valmiki's Ramayana, actually. Valmiki's Ramayana, Sita was assertive. Sita had a voice of her own. She was an intelligent woman, and she's even an advisor. She even advises Ram in the Valmiki version. But as our social structure undergoes a change, as the status of women underwent a change, we will see that subsequently the role of Sita continuously went on getting diminished, till the fact that she ended up being just a shadow of Ram, and nothing really concrete. Not in Bhilramyana. In Bhilramyana, she is an extremely intelligent woman. And these are also a set of stories which are known as Ram Sita Nivarta. That's how they pronounce Ram, as Ram Sita Nivarta. These are stories of Ram and Sita. And again, as I mentioned to you earlier, they are not sequential. They are individual stories. And there's a very brilliant way of looking at it, is that here Ram is the eldest prince of Ayodhya, and as such a human being with very human attributes. In certain, like Kamban Ramayana is probably considered to be one of the first where Ram was deified as an avatar of Vishnu. And thereafter nearly every version talks about it. Not the bhilramyana, not any of the tribal Ramayans too. But, he is a very simple person. He doesn't talk much and is very passive in his behavior. Now, this passive behavior of Ram irks Sita very, very often. And there's an interesting speech that she gives at one point of time, that when they are in the forest, Ram is just standing, doing nothing. And that's when Sita tells Lakshman in a very taunting voice, saying that, look, I mean, we are all sadhus and sadhvis out here. So nothing will happen on its own. Please tell your brother that one has to work here. We are no more in a palace. We are no more kings. We are no more people who had a lot of servants. We need to work here. Please explain to him that a house has to be built now. It won't happen on its own. Please explain to him about the affairs of life, that one has to now struggle. Look how he's standing there on the side like a pillar. Tell him neither he can keep standing forever, nor can we do penance, because usse to pet nahi bharega hamara. It will simply not do. Ask him to go get some fruits as we are hungry. And meanwhile, you and I, that is Lakshman and I, will decide where to dig a well and how to fetch water. So in the Bhil version, Sita decides when to build a house, where to build a house, where to dig, the well, and etc. So everything happens by her command. And Ram is a passive observer in the entire story. And Sita comes across as a very, very charming personality. Somebody who's got a sense of humor, somebody who once in a while taunts her husband, somebody who jokes. And that's what is the most interesting part of the Bhil Ramayana, wherein you can see Sita asserting, Sita directing, Sita controlling every aspect of their life. And of course, there is a lot of role about Kaikeyi and everybody there. And so according to these Bhil versions is that Sita takes all the initiatives. She takes all the decisions and literally implements them personally. She decides where the well has to be dug, and she knows what is the science behind digging a well. And that's what makes her. And she, unlike others, literally enjoys the life in the jungle and teaches others. This shows how the tribal people are at home when they are in the forest, just as the tribals enjoy the forest, they be close to the nature. We find Sita actually, enjoying it, and she takes and when she's banished later on, as the story moves on, she takes it in her stride, and she actually wishes Ram well before leaving. And she says, as she says that, she's not interested in even proving her chastity. She's not even interested in proving her innocence, and she leaves. Very, very interesting personality here of Sita, wherein we find a very different take here. Of course, there are other changes here also, wherein, Hanuman is much married in this particular version. And his wife has also been abducted, when they meet Hanuman and he's crying, and he takes Ram's help, in getting Hanuman's wife back. And that's why Hanuman also helps, in Ram's wife back. So Ravan's, the whole thing about Ravan here is that Ravan for Bhils is really not a Rakshas. He's not a demon for them, right? So there is no mention of the word Rakshas in the entire epic. He's simply a king of Lankagar, as they call in that version. He's the king of Lankagar. And when he dies, there is a very simple comment made. The ego is dead, which goes on to show that ego, can destroy a human being. And I think the simple message that the story gives is that the ego of a man is man's undoing. And that's what the story talks about. And remember, there are no major battles being waged here. There is, of course, battle, but nothing major. No weapons used to kill any animals, right? There is absolutely nothing. However, considering that the Bhils were a hunting tribe, okay, it's the whole preaching of non-violence, probably a lot of scholars feel is could be a later influence of non-violence by Gandhiji, whose presence in Gujarat was well known. So you see how the local belief system, the local circumstances have all gone in these kind of stories. So again, the Ramayana also has different stories. So, and Ravan, as I mentioned to you, is a very, very important character here, though he's not a demon. And the Konkanas, which are a kind of a tribal group in North Gujarat, also have a very interesting story about Ravan. And they believe that Ravan was the fifth brother of the others, but except that he was born without hands and without legs. So it was quite a problem for him, and all his brothers would take pains during the entire day to help him with every activity. Dire dire, the brothers got married and the wives came in, and now the wives had to also help out, and the wives were upset, saying, where are we saddled with this handicapped boy, and all our life we'll have to take care of him. So one day they decide to get rid of him, and they literally throw him out of the house. Ravan pleads, without head, without hands, and without legs. He pleads and pleads, but nobody listens to him. So he rolls, takes his body, and he's a great devotee of Lord Shiva. He rolls and rolls, and he goes to Lord Shiva's temple, and he prays out there. Lord Shiva appears to him, and he says that, wait, I have some work. He says, what have you done to me? I'm a great devotee of you, and you've given me a life without legs and hands. I think you must do something. So Shiva's moved by his state, and Shiva says, okay, fair enough. Let me come back to you. I have some work to attend, and I'll come back. However, make sure don't go all over the place, and especially stay away from that particular room. That's a room you should never visit. And, when it happens, whenever somebody's told, don't do this, everybody wants to do that. And as soon as Shiva leaves, Ravan goes to that room and he tries to open it, except that as soon as the door opens, he falls in it because it's a deep well. And, he keeps taking Shiva's name, and he keeps trying to pull himself up from the waters. It was like a deep well. He kept coming up and down, nearly 10 times before he could come back. And by the time he came out and Shiva helped him out, he had 10 heads, and Shiva reprimanded him and saying that I told you not to go. By that time he had even 10 hands. So Ravan says, what have you done to me? He says, it's not me, it's you who don't trust people so easily. Now you will live with these 10 heads. And that's how the Kunkunas, an interesting tribal setup, who believe that that's how Ravan got his 10 heads. So you see, there are different versions, and there are different ways of every culture has explained the story in their own way, in their own understanding, and that's what makes the story, the entire epic, interesting. This brings me to another lesser known Ramayana known as the Mapillaramayana. So the Mapillas are a small community in the northern Malabar region. And, they took shape in the early 20th centuries, rather much, the whole Ramayana is dated then. But around the 7th century AD, a lot of the Arabs came to trade with India, and some of them settled in this Malabar coast. And a lot of the Malayali language and the Arabian language kind of got mixed up to create what is known as the Mapilla language. And some interesting aspect is that in this Ramayana, there is no Ra, there is no R, so they have La. So they call it the Lamayana, they call it Lama, and they call it Lavana. That's how, because of the dialect not having an R, so that's how the story goes. But interesting is this whole narrative of Mapillaramayana was told in a folk format called the Mapillapattu. That's the format. And it is believed that at one point of time, there was this wandering madman called Hasanakutti. Hasanakutti would, what he do, and he was called the mad. Okay, so what he did is, he started narrating a version of Ramayana, which had a lot of sense of humor in it, So, and the people used to call him mad. And he created what is known as an entire body of work. And way back in the 1926, there was a young person by the name of a Hindu boy who heard this, and he, sort of memorized nearly 700 lines. Nearly 700 lines were memorized by him, who went on to become a very, very well-known folklorist by the name of T.H. Kunhiraman Nambiar. And what we have today is just those 700 lines of this Ramayana. And it is believed that till a few decades back, the Hindus and the Muslims would get together and hear the recitation, and they would really enjoy it. As I said, times have changed. This practice has probably stopped, and what we have is just the little known versions, which thanks to Mr. Nambiar has got recorded. And interestingly, to make it their story, there is a number of aspects which are both funny. So there is a lot of humor thrown in here, especially in this particular episode, which is known as Surpanakha's overtures, where he makes his overture, where he proposes to Ram. And here, Surpanakha is referred to as Bibi Surpanakha, as it goes with the dialect. And Ram is a sultan. He's a sultan, there. And, his kingdom is Kosala. That's his kingdom. And he, it happens that Surpanakha proposes to Ram, and Ram says, no, I can't. And Surpanakha says, and I quote, for a man there is a woman, and for a woman there is a man. This is the law in the Shariat. So she quotes Shariat here and says, if a man keeps 4 or 5 women, there is no problem. It's allowed in our Shariat. What is your problem? The mention of Shariat in the ancient epic shouldn't be surprising at all, because remember, as I said, that every community or every culture tried to make it their own story. But there is a lot of puns here and a lot of humor thrown in here. Like, for example, before when Surpanakha actually sees Ram for the first time, and she looks at herself and she realizes she's not very good looking, and she's got gray hair because she's an aging woman. So she takes charcoal and catches each of her strand and colors it with black charcoal and honey to make it give that gloss. And then she calls a neighbor's daughter to, get the hair into braid. Her name is Fatima. Interestingly, Fatima is the daughter of the Prophet. And this girl is Bibi Surpanakha's neighbor, who is somebody as chaste and as nice as Fatima. So you see how these kind of stories have got imbibed, and the whole effect that it creates when Surpanakha proposes to Ram is, even today when narrated, people find it hilarious, because the conversation between Ram and Surpanakha is very, very funny, to the extent, that there is even a bit of, call it teasing, if I may add, very casual flirting added in, where people just can't help but laugh. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, we don't have much left of the text, because they haven't been recorded. Whatever little Mr. Nambiar has done is all that we have today. And we've lost the practice of sitting together and singing the songs and listening to it. But I still feel that this is an area where work needs to be done, and probably whatever is there needs to be resurrected, as this is a part of our Ramayana heritage, which we shouldn't let it go. Probably another very interesting version of Ramayana is the Jain Ramayana. Jain Ramayana is a version which prides in the fact that it's a very, very rational Ramayana. When I use the word rational, there is a lot of scientific approach to a narrative, which they felt was not very scientific. So, here you don't have any magical aspects happening. You don't have any flights of fancy. Everything is very, very believable. Right. And for example, the whole story of Ravan having 10 heads, it doesn't exist here, because, they feel that it just can't be possible. So how do you justify that? So they believe that when Ravan was born, his mother gave him a necklace which had 9 big beads, moti. And they were so sharp and they were so glossy that they reflect, and that when it was put on his neck, it reflected his face. And that's how the 9 faces, and that's how Ravan's mother named Ravan Dashamukh, sorry, Dashamukh. That's how the logic is. That's how they try to rationalize it. And interestingly, besides every other aspect, which is more or less the same, no amount of, there are no monkeys here, there are no bears here. Interesting is that the characters, that is Hanuman and the monkeys and the bears, are totemic tribes. These are tribes who worship the totemic animal. So the Vanara tribes are the people who worship a Vanar totem. And the Jamwan tribes are the ones who worship a bear totem, which is exactly how today we rationalize the presence of Vanars and bears in Ramayana in modern times. So you see, when the Jain Ramayana was written, it already had taken one significant departure from the original, is that it's not Ram who kills Ravan, it is Lakshman who kills Ravan. Why? Because for Ram, that was the last human mortal birth before he becomes a Tirthankar. And that is why, in his case, there has been, in this story, he doesn't kill Ravan, but Lakshman does. So you see how this story has also kind of made it as, what we call your story, the story in which in the milieu in which the story has been told. I think that was all I have in this. There are many, many versions. As I said, we can't do justice to all of them. If there is any other, there are lots of them. As I said, there is the Adbhut Ramayana, there is a Rasik Sampradaya Ramayana. There are so many Ramayans which I have not even touched, but I'm sure there'll be another occasion when we can look into it.
Yeah. Thank you. Sir, can you please switch on to your video, stop sharing the screen so that we get to see your face more?
Yes.
Yeah, better.
Yeah.
So right. It was quite an exhaustive, and like it was really nice to actually see, not just for the fact that we have varied versions of stories. I was just wondering, see, even the use of animals per se, usage of animals as characters. So initially you see maybe Jain also is little later part, like if you just, maybe if I go chronologically. So I was just thinking, is it, as a child also, which was very, very interesting for me, was Ganesh, Hanuman, all these characters, like how you actually write. I'm just purely speaking in terms of a filmmaker now. I'm just taking away the part of politics which has been played with both the names, as a character, like, and how these characters are actually designed. Because what happens post realism, when Western realism comes, and the way stories are told also, unlike even in cinema recent days, what we see is this kind of aversion to maybe songs or so the storytelling. These things are considered little less cinema. Like, I'm talking in terms of the high art cinema practice, whatever have been. But this was not the case, even with the most serious filmmakers in 60s, 70s. I think this post globalization, with the idea of rational, obviously, if you something which we have not touched, again, A.K. Ramanujan's text, I think it was removed from a lot of universities. I don't know, even this video, what kind of trouble it might bring to you. Like, I'm not worried much. But the thing is, even in that, the Sachi Ramayana, what in Hindi as it is translated by Periyar, even what he actually proposes is very, when you say that it's not completely rejecting that text. He could easily tell that it's all lies and that story never happened. That could have stopped there. But to get to people, it's very important to form another myth where you make Ravan the hero. And even Mani Ratnam tried in his film, like later, like Ravan. So this is very interesting. So I, as a person, can, if I'm just a fancy atheist, like that's what I make a difference between who are like materialist or dialectical materialist or Marxist perspective is completely different from just being a liberal atheist where you completely reject this, or because that's not going to happen, because you like it or not, the story exists.
Yes.
Yeah, and it had created some kind of a problem. So I remember again Periyar telling to Gandhiji, Periyar was completely an atheist and he rejected the religion, and he told to Gandhi that, Gandhiji, if you are going to reform Hinduism and do all these things, and he told it 10 years before he was killed by Godse. He told this before 10 years that you will be killed. So that's where actually the crux lies. It's easy. I think if even if you just leave it off and go, nobody's going to care. Again, with Chhatrapati Shivaji, it happened, like where what Pansare had written about the real Shivaji, and like there is a beautiful play named Shivaji Underground, which is also talking about the secular characteristics of Shivaji, and they face problems. So what I'm getting it at as youngsters, you might have aversion and like other things about all these things. So how do we actually create an atmosphere where these things come with a more fresh perspective? Ranganayagama doing that is one, but again that will be seen as only a Marxist thing. And as you said, Mapillaramayana
Yes.
doesn't even have a place now. People can't perform. I know what will happen, like if they perform, even in a state like Kerala. Can't even imagine that in Cowbell. That will be something else.
True.
So where do we actually draw lines with these? So yeah.
One thing you must understand, that we in India have a problem. And what is the problem? The problem is our myths have become our religion, right? Unlike any other mythology, be it the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Norse, their mythology remained their mythology, whereas our mythology became our religion. Our mythical heroes, our mythological characters became our gods, right? Which means that uh, they've become kind of sacred. They've kind of become touch me nots. So it's going to be a tough thing. So while people can keep playing politics with this, I mean, that should not be our concern. I still feel that the younger generation and people who want to know should continue the quest in knowing, rather than trying to label it as, is this history? Like I keep getting this question, is this history? And my first question is, how does it matter to you?
But now it
Why
had
does
mattered. Now it had mattered
yeah,
because everything was played,
yeah.
telling that it's history. That's the
No, but
problem.
I'm saying, is it history or not? Why does it even matter to you?
Yeah.
Have you imbibed in the very nuance of the story? Have you understood the story? If it is history, how does world change for you? If it is not history, how does the world change for you? Can the beauty of the story be removed if it is history? Or will it add, enhance 10 more stars to the story if I tell you that, yes, this is history? I think in this whole quest of it being history or not, I think I've done a huge disservice to the very text which was written. I think it's a beautiful piece of literature. Do you read let's say Kalidas's Shakuntala? When you read it, do you think, is this true? No, you enjoy the beauty of the literature. You take it as a piece of literature and enjoy it. And Ramayan, being such a had so much of richness in its literature, so much of adaptability in its form, there isn't another text in the world. There isn't another text in the world which is as rich, that I can adapt it to my own self, forget about my community. That's the richness of a text. Why do you want to mar it? Why do you want to spoil it? Why do you want to kill it by associating or by bothering yourself? Is this history or not? I think that's a very, very big problem that we have put ourselves into. If it is history, does it become very important? Does it become more venerable than what it was? No, it doesn't have to be. And this should not stop you from reading or knowing about every other version of Ramayana. I mean, I feel that I need another 50 years, and I hope I have it. I need another 50 years to probably do justice to every other version, because every time I read a version, every time I unearth a new version, I am amazed by its beauty. I am amazed by its potential. I am amazed by its ability to absorb. I mean, we don't have a lifetime to appreciate this. And, we are messing around by saying, is this history or not? Did he exist? Forget it. Just read the text. It's so beautiful. And remember, this is something that I've always felt. At every stage of your life, when you read these texts, you will realize that you missed something when you read it 5 years back. Is there a text in the world which is as rich as this? You read it in your 30s, you read it in your 40s, you read it in your 50s. Every time you will find something that you must have missed. And read every version. Read every version, and you'll realize that every character has been dealt. Look at Urmila, for example. Urmila. Valmiki doesn't talk about Urmila at all. Valmiki doesn't talk about Shanta, Ram's sister, at all. But look at the Telugu versions. They give so much of importance to Urmila and Shanta. Shanta actually stands up against Ram and criticizes Ram for sending Sita away. And there is a small aspect wherein, when Ram is about to do his Ashwamedha Yagya, he needs, the ritual says that the wife, that is the queen, will have to be bathed by, the king's sister. That's some ritual. And when Urmila comes to know that she has to bathe a golden image of Sita, she puts her foot down saying, sorry, I'm not doing it. Get my bhabhi, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And so he says, no, but there's no option. So did you ask me before sending your wife away? I was your elder sister. Did you even ask me? See how brilliantly this aspect has been brought, that it was a family matter. How did you just take a decision on your own? And if you did, now live it. I'm not helping you. Now look at the stand taken by Shanta. Look at the stand taken by Urmila, where she walks up to Ram and says, if she was not chaste, we are also not chaste. Deal with us the same way. Look at the strength in the text, which enables this woman to walk up to Ram. That's the beauty of the text. Nobody's denigrating anybody here. Yes, there are certain versions which will probably look down upon it. Does that make the text or the character less venerable for you? If you read a particular version, take Kritibhasha's Bengali Ramayana. The Kritibhasha's Bengali Ramayana and Ram is so human that he actually breaks down when he comes to know that Sita has been kidnapped. He breaks down. Isn't that natural? Isn't that natural that a man can break down? But look at the northern versions. They're all very macho. Suits them. So I'm only trying to say that the richness of the text should not be taken away in this big quest of, is it true? Is it history or not? Oh, well, I don't care two hoots about it. It's a text which needs to be read. It's a text which needs to be appreciated in its entire nuances that it has. Why bother about these things? Also, you raised something about the animals here. At the beginning, you said something about Ganesh and all. Remember, all cultures, all initial cultures, okay, have had an element of animism. Animism as in, the worship of animals. So now, because of the fact that, we have this whole polytheistic, approach to our religion, we worship trees, we worship animals, and this hybridization of God and animals is a very common phenomena, which is also found in Egyptian mythology, and many other mythologies.
But it's very less in Abrahamic religions, right?
No, in Abrahamic religions, you will not have it, because there's a singular God. In a singular God, there is no scope of anybody else or anything else coming in. But in all polytheistic cultures, like Greeks, Indians, Hindu mythology, Greek mythology, Egyptian, your Aztecs and the Mayans, to an extent, the Nordic and the Scandinavian mythology.
Even Chinese,
numerous
right?
gods.
Chinese, Buddhist, later Buddhist, Chinese,
Sorry?
Tibetan, Chinese, Buddhist.
Yes, indigenous Chinese.
Yeah.
Indigenous Chinese, not the present Chinese, because present Chinese is more Buddhist, but the indigenous Chinese had a lot of animals, dragons as their harbingers of rain. So the Chinese believed that dragons were not scary creatures. They were the ones who brought in rains for us. So you see, people gave a lot of importance to animals. Also, remember that man was always kind of enamored by the powers that certain animals had. For example, a fish could swim, I couldn't. A bird could fly high up in the sky, I can't. A cheetah can run fast, I can't. So how do I imbibe those characters? And that's why you'll find, animals being worshipped, certain aspects, like in the North American mythology, they worshipped a lot of those birds, like the eagle, then the animals like jaguar. They were considered to be smart and intelligent beings in the mythical times. So
Because
to
there were
have
two, yeah,
an animal god, or
like why I raised this question
yeah,
of,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, one was obviously, sorry to interrupt, one was obviously uh, uh, to as a child, how did I see it as a curious thing, and like purely in terms of idea of a writing perspective or characterization perspective. The second was also because even when you read Sangam poetry, a tree is never a tree. It is always a peepal tree or a neem tree. So the interdependency of the ecosystem and also the respect.
Yes,
The tree is not a
yes,
tree. You don't call a man. Like, he's an individual. A woman is not a woman. Sita, she's an individual. She has her own characteristics. So that is
right.
something very beautiful about, and also about the Sangam landscape, how the landscape actually uh, plays an important part in the emotion. The jungle plays an important part in the emotion. So I was also wondering that how these nuances have been beautifully written, unlike very, maybe you don't see that in much of literature right now, where easily people write there was a tree. So I feel you will
What
never.
has happened is, uh, sorry,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead,
yeah,
go
that's
ahead,
all,
complete
that's
it.
all. Yeah, yeah, you please. Yeah.
I think we have become, slaves to scientific temperament and rationalism. And that's why everything we look at from a rationalistic prism. We've forgotten those times when, in Kalidas's Meghadutam, Kalidas's character actually talks to the clouds and say, go take, and there's a full long treatise, where the character tells the cloud, take my message to my lover. I think those nuances have gone. I think people can't accept these kind of songs anymore, these kind of nuances anymore. And I think we are more, how rational is it? And as I said, going back, is it possible? Is it true? And I think we're so bogged down by this that I think we've lost how to appreciate literature.
Hmm.
Unfortunate development, but that's the truth. I think
No, I
we've just
see the
stopped
other way.
appreciating.
Actually, I see it. Obviously, scientific temperament as not a problem here, even not rationalism, because I feel the problem here is this kind of a very, uh, very what do I say that? See, when you see something like you critique it, no doubt about it, but also you have a nuanced perspective, like,
True, I
okay, I
agree.
read it, I have my questions, but again, how do I deal that? Like, as we discussed earlier, you like it or not, it exists, and it had created problems. So unless and until, as this,
Exactly.
the entire point
Absolutely.
of this discussion was only my intention or our intention with the collective is actually to say, right now, not just with Ram, the entire thing about this homogenization of cultures, like you said about Wayanad Ramayana, they were meat eaters, and there was no.
Yes.
It was not Ravan who is like taking away her. And even I know a story where Kamban Ramayana. I don't know whether many people are aware of it. The Kamban Ramayana, they tell there is a story behind it. They tell it was commissioned by Cheras, because you, as a Hindu king, you cannot cross the sea and invade a kingdom.
Right.
So there is a rule for Hindu kings. So you have to justify that. So they all say that there is a commission. So Kamban was commissioned to write that, so that you justify a king's act of crossing the sea. Again, if I go by the logic, whether it's true,
Okay.
see, again, that's what I'm getting at. If somebody is telling it as true, or you counter it with another kind of a truth which makes it more absurd. So it almost like negates it. So I think that's the intelligent way of doing
Right.
it. Otherwise, yeah, some people even criticize Periyar that because in South, Ravan has become a very important symbol of resistance. It almost like Aryan Ram and Dravidian Ravan. It has become like
Yeah.
that. So you might tell that again, both are mythology or both are this. Why do you have to take it? But again, I see that's how you can handle it when it comes to stories or like. And again, as you said, when mythologies are interpreted as religions, another problem because of what we are here, as you said, we are not able to appreciate the test is also because of the reason that religion is no more a personal matter. It has become a state subject.
Yes.
When state and religion
Yeah.
have
Unfortunately.
become one, then automatically you are going to curtail the freedom of minorities, and like this kind of a thing will happen. Like here it is done by it's done in name of Hindutva. Then you have Rohingya where Buddhists do it. You have Sri Lanka where Buddhists have done to minorities. You have a lot of places, Palestine, Israel. You can keep on telling about that. I think it was a great discussion. Uh, we have actually answered many questions with your talk. I think we have already answered most of the questions. So, any ending note so that we leave it here?
Well, I just would like to end by saying that, it's a text, it's a brilliant piece of literature, and let's treat it as a very good piece of literature, which should be read by everybody, and form your own opinion on whatever the text has to say or offer. Don't go by what somebody has fed you. Be your own independent judge. It's a text that I feel everybody should read because it's a brilliant piece of literature. And as I said, even today, people are writing pieces on it. Even they're writing short stories out of it. They're writing big novels out of it. That shows the fact that it's such a rich piece of our heritage that, let's not let nobody mess around with it. It's your story. It's our story. It's the foundation of our nation. It's everybody's story. And thus, I don't think anybody has a right to it. All of us have a right to it. It's yours, it's mine, it's everybody's. Let's all read it. Let's all read it, appreciate it, understand it, and form our own opinions about it.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nachi. Thank you very much for sort of bringing out certain things which I normally don't in my sessions. But if that gets me into trouble, Nachi, trust me, I'll drag you along with me.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Right. Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Nachi.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it was a pleasure being here and speaking to you.
yeah, yeah.
And
Thank you.
thank you, everybody who's joined us for this session. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good night.
thank you.